Welcome to Narrator. Today, we're diving into a powerful sentiment echoed throughout American history. War is hell, as General Sherman famously declared. This idea resonates deeply with many Americans today, especially regarding military involvement in the Middle East. A recent poll reveals that over 60% of Americans believe the US should reduce its military presence in the region. But this reluctance isn't just an abstract foreign policy discussion, it's a significant factor that could influence the 2024 elections. So how does a nation grappling with war fatigue navigate this complex geopolitical landscape? What does this mean for voters and politicians as they approach a pivotal election year? These are not easy questions, but they are crucial ones that we need to explore together as we move toward 2024. Let's unpack the implications of these attitudes and what they mean for our future. This isn't just about some far-off land. Every dollar spent on bombs and bullets overseas is a dollar not spent on schools, hospitals, and roads here at home. Every American soldier sent to fight in a foreign land is a son or daughter, a father or mother, a friend or neighbor who is missed and mourned. Do we want to be the world's policeman, forever embroiled in conflicts that seem to have no end? Or do we want to prioritize diplomacy, dialogue, and dare I say it, a little bit of humility? Over the next few minutes, we're going to dive deep into this issue. To understand American reluctance about Middle Eastern wars, we need to understand the mess that is the Middle East. At the heart of that mess, a centuries-old religious and political rivalry between Iran and Israel. Religious differences, territorial disputes, you name it. They've gone through it all. And to make matters even more complicated, they've both become regional powerhouses with their own allies and enemies. And every now and then, when things get really heated, someone throws a lit match into the mix. That someone, more often than not, has been the good old US of A. America's relationship with the Middle East is complicated. We love their oil. We hate their terrorism. We want them to be democratic, but not too democratic because, that might disrupt the oil flow. Over the decades, the US has inserted itself into the region's conflicts in ways that have yielded mixed results. We backed the Shah of Iran, then freaked out when he was overthrown in the 1979 Islamic Revolution. This is to say that the US has a long and often contradictory history in the Middle East. And with each intervention, with each drone strike and military base, we've deepened our entanglement in a region that seems allergic to peace. We're tired of endless wars. We're tired of seeing our young men and women sent to fight and die in far-off lands. We're tired of watching trillions of dollars being poured into military adventures while our schools crumble and our bridges collapse. This fatigue, this weariness, is the direct result of decades of American interventionism in the Middle East. We've been at this for so long that it's become the new normal. But here's the thing about normal. Eventually, people start to question it. They start to wonder if there's a better way. Let's talk about money, or more specifically, the eye-watering sums of cash the US has spent on wars in the Middle East. We're talking trillions, folks. But instead, we've spent it on bombs, bullets, and nation-building exercises that seem to have produced, shall we say, mixed results. And what do we have to show for it? A region still mired in conflict, a public wary of further military entanglements, and a generation of veterans struggling with the physical and emotional scars of war. Not exactly a winning return on investment, is it? Speaking of things that need fixing, let's talk about America briefly, shall we? Healthcare costs are through the roof. Infrastructure is crumbling faster than a cookie in a toddler's hand. And don't even get me started on the state of our education system. It's enough to make you wonder if we should focus a little more on Homeland Security's home component. Because here's the thing. It's hard to convince Americans that we need to be the world's policeman when our own house is on fire. Americans are increasingly questioning whether our foreign policy priorities align with our domestic needs. Now you might be thinking, you're making it sound like Americans are a bunch of isolationist Scrooges who don't care about the rest of the world. Americans aren't heartless. We don't want to see suffering, whether it's happening in our backyard or halfway across the world. But we've also learned a hard lesson over the past few decades. Military interventions, especially in the Middle East, rarely go according to plan. They tend to be costly, both in terms of human life and financial resources. They often create more problems than they solve, and they can have unintended consequences that come back to bite us in the you-know-what. Call it wisdom born of experience, or maybe just a healthy dose of skepticism. All right, let's talk elections. Because as much as some politicians like to pretend otherwise, what happens in the Middle East doesn't stay in the Middle East. And in the 2024 election cycle, with American wariness towards Middle Eastern conflicts at an all-time high, you can bet your bottom dollar that foreign policy is going to be a major battleground. Candidates, bless their opportunistic souls, are already tripping over themselves to position themselves as the most electable choice for a nation grappling with war fatigue. It's a delicate dance, really. Candidates have to appeal to voters who are tired of endless wars, while also reassuring those who worry about the consequences of disengagement. It's not just the candidates themselves shaping the narrative. Time for special interest groups and advocacy organizations to swoop in with their agendas and megaphones. From pro-Israel lobbies pouring money into campaigns to human rights organizations highlighting the civilian cost of drone strikes, everyone's got someone in this fight. The problem is that this often leads to a situation where voters are bombarded with information from sources that already align with their existing beliefs. It's the echo chamber effect in full force, folks, and it's not exactly conducive to nuanced debate or informed decision-making. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the Israel lobby. Specifically, the perception, rightly or wrongly, that American support for Israel often trumps other foreign policy considerations. The US has a long and complicated relationship with Israel, one that is deeply intertwined with domestic politics, religious beliefs, and strategic interests. And this relationship, for better or for worse, has a significant impact on how candidates approach the issue of Middle East policy. Candidates are acutely aware of the political influence of pro-Israel groups and the potential consequences of being perceived as anti-Israel. The power of the purse, campaign finance, and foreign policy stances. Money talks in American politics, and in foreign policy it speaks with a specific accent. Defense contractors, foreign governments, and wealthy individuals shape US foreign policy. They contribute millions to campaigns, buying access, influence, and a megaphone for their viewpoints. Candidates may support policies benefiting donors, even if they're not in the country's best interest. A nation divided, foreign policy, and the partisan divide. So we've established that Americans are tired of war in the Middle East, and that this wariness is having a big impact on the 2024 elections. But what does this actually mean in practice? How might these attitudes play out in the political arena and reshape the dynamics between the two major parties? Well, for starters, it's likely to further deepen the partisan divide on foreign policy. We're already seeing this happening, with Republicans generally more hawkish and Democrats more dovish, though there are, of course, exceptions on both sides. But this trend is likely to intensify as voters increasingly align themselves with parties that reflect their views on foreign intervention. This could lead to a situation where foreign policy becomes even more polarized, with each side retreating further into its own echo chamber and demonizing the other's positions. Compromise and nuanced debate could become even rarer, replaced by partisan gridlock and a foreign policy driven more by ideology than by strategic interests. The rise of the pragmatists. A new generation demands a new approach. However, amidst this potential for increased polarization, there's also a glimmer of hope. A new generation of voters, many of whom came of age in the shadow of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, is demanding a different approach to foreign policy. These voters, often described as pragmatists, are less wedded to traditional ideological labels and more interested in results. They're skeptical of both military adventurism and isolationism, and instead favor a more nuanced, pragmatic approach that prioritizes diplomacy, multilateralism, and a clear-eyed assessment of US interests and limitations. This emerging pragmatism could have a significant impact on the 2024 elections and beyond. It could force candidates from both parties to move away from tired talking points and engage more seriously with the complexities of foreign policy. It could create space for new voices and new ideas, challenging the dominance of established foreign policy elites. And it could ultimately lead to a more balanced and sustainable approach to US engagement with the world. Beyond the immediate impact of the 2024 elections, American reluctance about war in the Middle East also reflects a broader shift in the global landscape. The US is no longer the undisputed hegemon it once was. Other powers, such as China and Russia, are challenging US influence on the world stage. At the same time, transnational issues like climate change, pandemics, and cyber warfare are demanding new forms of international cooperation. In this changing world, the old playbook of military interventionism is looking increasingly outdated and ineffective. The US can no longer simply dictate terms to the rest of the world. It needs to adapt to a more multipolar reality, one that requires diplomacy, collaboration, and a willingness to share power. This doesn't mean that the US should abandon its role as a global leader, but it does mean rethinking the nature of that leadership. It means leading by example, not by force. It means prioritizing diplomacy and multilateralism over unilateral action. And it means recognizing that true security comes not just from military might, but from addressing the root causes of conflict, such as poverty, inequality, and lack of opportunity. The decisions made by American voters and policymakers in the coming years will have profound implications for the US and the entire world. A more inward-looking, isolationist America would create a vacuum in global leadership, one that could be filled by less benevolent actors. It could embolden authoritarian regimes and undermine efforts to address global challenges. Conversely, a more engaged but also more humble and collaborative America could help to build a more peaceful and prosperous world. It could strengthen alliances, promote democracy and human rights, and foster international cooperation on critical issues. The choice is ours. But we must choose wisely, for the stakes have never been higher. I'll leave you to ponder the potential outcomes of American reluctance about war in the Middle East. A whirlwind tour of America's complicated relationship with the Middle East. We've covered a lot of ground, from the history of US interventionism to the growing public weariness with endless wars. But here's the thing, we can't afford to tune out. The decisions made in the coming years will have far-reaching consequences. They will determine the course of US foreign policy for years to come. The road ahead is long and uncertain. There are no easy answers to the complex challenges facing the Middle East and the world. What role do you want the US to play in the world? Be sure to share your thoughts, predictions, and anxieties in the comments below. Because if there's one thing we can all agree on, it's that the future is uncertain. But hey, at least we have each other to navigate this crazy world together. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more content. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Until next time, keep exploring and stay curious.